Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this installment of our Career Pathway series, Exiting Academia. Today we have a fascinating interview with Dr. Mark Lawson, who successfully transitioned from completing a PhD in computer science into the exciting industry vertical of computational tech. So let's get right into it. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. Gertrude Nantra.
Welcome everyone, Dr. G. Nantra here, and today I am so excited to be joined by Dr. Mark Lawson. You're welcome, Dr. Lawson.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your educational background and what led to your decision to leave academia.
Sure thing. So my educational background is I went to Virginia Tech from 2000 through 2009. I started there as an undergrad studying computer science. And I enjoyed the studying and the learning about it so much that I decided that I would stay in grad school and pursue that. I also just didn't feel strongly about what direction I would want to go in the industry at that point. I was still more in an exploratory phase. I was interested in machine learning. I was interested in bioinformatics. Maybe I could explore those further by doing some research in these fields. And so that's what I chose to do. And I spent the next about 5.5 years in graduate school at Virginia Tech. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed working with my PI. I enjoyed working with the people in my lab. We published a few papers. I finally completed my dissertation, where it was essentially just I focused on those two main topics: how to apply machine learning to biological data sets. My experience was great. I really enjoyed it. My PI was a very nurturing, and I learned a lot from her. But after that, I kind of looked around. I was 29 years old, and I had really nothing in the way of savings or any type of financial stability at this point. I had been living off of stipends, which luckily in Blacksburg go pretty far away, but eventually, I mean, money is not the most important thing in my life, but I was in a relationship for many, many years at this point, with a woman that I ended up eventually marrying, but I wanted to be able to have some level of financial stability. And what I was witnessing in the labs that I was in or interacted with was how this publish or perish model, this constantly looking for grant funding, because my PI did what she could to get me research assistantships to fund me during the school years, but other times I'd have to be working as a TA. And in order to continue funding that, and the TA positions were also interesting learning, but they were completely unrelated to what I was doing in graduate school. So I guess that's the long and short of why I initially decided to look into industry.
Right. And I think it's a really valid reason. You were mentioning that money is not the most important thing, and I totally agree with you, but unfortunately, everything that we have to transact in our normal lives has to do with money, right? Like,
Right.
whether you're going to buy gas, if you're trying to give your children a bit of a better life, everything does end up involving money. So I think that part of the equation for me also was, at the time I finished my PhD, I was 32. So I was even older, and I was like, wow, just
Not that much.
the 8 years removed from 40, right? And I don't see any financial.
Yeah.
So it's a really valid point. So thanks for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. So could you tell us a little bit about were you going to say something?
No. Go right ahead.
Could you tell us about what you're doing now and what your day-to-day looks like?
Right. Well, I guess I count myself lucky in the fact that I was able to continue to do the type of research that I was doing in academia, continue to be able to do that outside of academia. I work in biotech. I've worked in drug discovery for the past 12, 13 years.
Yeah.
And it's usually involving machine learning, and how to apply that to find potential new drug therapies, new drug targets. Um, and so that has been my main focus for the past few years now, and I've really enjoyed it. I find it's a career that has a lot of demand, and it involve it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And or how about your day to day, right? Your day to day using machine learning to find within the biotech, biopharma industry, what does that look like?
Okay. So there's a lot of analysis that I have to do. We try to analyze data as much as we can to get as much understanding of it as we can. There's a lot of interactions with various different stakeholders in the company. So I'm working with various types of scientific directors. I'm working with biologists, biologists or biochemists that are running the experiments so there's a back and forth there. Um, on like they'll run an experiment. Does that disprove or prove what I was saying? If it does or it doesn't, why is that the case? Or they'll run an experiment. I need to analyze the data. We go back and forth as to what type of analysis would make the most sense. Then there's also presenting of data and being able to communicate this stuff to the various stakeholders, like people within my team, people within other teams, and so that involves creating a lot of different visualizations, a lot of pretty graphs and pictures, and putting together presentations where we run through exactly the steps that we undertook.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. And the work you do is important, right? Because there are so many illnesses, so many diseases. I don't know which.
Correct.
I'm talking mostly about rare diseases, right? So you have rare diseases, you have diseases that may currently have a cure, but we could improve on the treatments. And so
Hmm.
the work you're doing is important in finding drug targets that we could potentially create, therapies for. So thanks for the work that you do. It's amazing work. Um, how did you find your current job? One of the questions I constantly face is I'm applying for jobs, I'm applying on LinkedIn, I'm applying on Indeed, I'm seeing nothing. How
Hmm.
did you find your job? What was that job search and job application process like?
Yeah, so I recently just went through this actually. I did the current position I'm in. I just started in January, so it's all very fresh, very um, and I'm almost it's mine was very normal process. I actually did apply through LinkedIn. I applied. I even did the easy apply through LinkedIn, which I've been told many times not to do. But exactly. So it was a bit different in the fact that so I work for Flagship Pioneering uh, now, and I actually work for what's called a NewCo, or a company in stealth mode that is part of the Flagship Pioneering umbrella. Because Flagship Pioneering is a company that essentially spawns off biotech companies. Their biggest success was Moderna. Moderna came out of Flagship Pioneering, and so the company I'm working for is still in stealth mode. And so when I did the application, I applied to Flagship Pioneering as a whole for a specific position.
Okay.
And then they got in touch with me. I talked to their HR representative about the position, and then we went from there. They did their usual screening process, and I talked to the hiring manager after that.
Mm. Mark, so you talk about stealth mode. I think a lot of people outside of the tech biotech space may not know what stealth mode means.
Sure thing,
Let
yeah.
Yeah, touch on
Okay, yeah. Well, in Flagship Pioneer, like I said, we use the term NewCo, which is also like even more specific to like this company. So stealth mode means that we are a full-fledged company, but we haven't officially announced who we are or what we do at this point. So that's still very much essentially like a trade secret at this point right now. We have a code name. We have a code name that I use that I put in my LinkedIn, but the actual name exists, but we're not supposed to say it just yet.
Say it. Just yeah, yes, and like you said, this has to do with trade secrets and patents and things that
Correct.
sometimes need to be filed before we can go public, so somebody doesn't steal the idea, right?
Right, right. And to essentially also be able to put our best foot forward, when
Exactly.
we announce ourselves to the world, that we're not just that we don't just look like a group of scientists huddled in the corner, that there's we have a whole management team and everything like that is being set up. And so it's a really great company. I've only been there a few months, but I've been really liking what we do and the people I work with.
Amazing. So you went on LinkedIn, use the easy apply button. I do tell people not to use the easy apply button. The only time you should use the easy apply button is when you have a resume that is fairly tailored to that specific type of job, and then you can throw your resume around. But if you use a generic resume, that will just frustrate you. So
Well, in this situation, it was the job. What I was pretty much the ideal candidate based
yeah,
on my history and I didn't even tailor my resume for it. My resume just happened to fit it very well, and so that's how I bubbled to the top anyway.
yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Talk about all the things aligning. So
Yeah.
awesome. That's, that's wonderful. So when you were making that move, from your story, you moved right from grad school into biotech.
Yes, I did have a bit of a weird transition, and then it was kind of like an in-between phase. So my first job out of grad school was working at UVA, um, University of Virginia, the Center for Public Health Genomics. And
Okay.
so I was working in an academic institute, but as a staff scientist. So I wasn't doing a postdoc position. So it was kind of like an in-between phase. I was working in academia, but not as an academic, if that if that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes
And
a lot
so
of
that was a nice little transition because I still had more of a 9 to 5 job than I did in academia, especially when I was working in grad school.
sense.
But I mean, it was a more like you're working with academics, and so like you're not dealing with the stakeholders that are demanding exact timelines, or there is an exact process on how we have to do things, because it was still very more like exploratory, and what can we do with this, and very more open-ended research.
Right, right. Okay, that's great. And you stayed there for about how long
I
before?
stayed there for about 2 years,
Okay.
before I joined a local biotech company that was also in Charlottesville, Virginia. That's where the UVA is located.
Yeah. So what would you say was did you face any challenges when you were moving from an academic research position to research within academia, research within biotech?
Um, I had to report to more people. I think that was one of the biggest differences, that because in a working in a research environment, at both in grad school and then I had a person I reported to. I had my PI, or my boss in a previous lab, but that was the extent of it. And then also meetings were basically just the lab getting together, what are we working on this week, and other things like that. But moving into an industry position, there was a heck of a lot more people of different types to interact with, because I
Yeah.
wasn't just interacting with fellow computational biologists or whatever we would call ourselves. I was interacting with stakeholders for a specific project, or I was interacting with our head of business development as to how can we use the tools that we've been working on, or how can we assist him in certain types of analyses. And I'm working with the chemists and the biologists. How can we manage your data? Because there's more of a there's still a research aspect, because most of what I do, it has to do with it, but there's also a services aspect to it as well. How can we help, um, you know, uh, uh, the stakeholders in the company get more value out of their data? And so that it just becomes more of um, there's more different types of analyses and work to be done in a corporate world than there are in an academic world,
Hmm.
at least in my experience.
Yes, and I think that's a really good distinction, right? Is that within academia, I feel like you also have like several stakeholders, but you don't necessarily interact with all of them, right?
Hmm.
You like you
Your
rightly said.
PI might be shielding you from some of that anyway.
Yes, yes. The PI is often shielding you from that. And if you are the PI, well, you'll probably face some of that. But usually, as a graduate student, you
Right.
don't get to have to face all of that. But absolutely, I agree with you that within industry, I've had to or not face, but I've had to deal with like people at the top, like people like 5 levels removed from me, and you're
Hmm.
having to talk to them about your work, and it's interesting for sure. So that was learning that. I think some of that is really important. Learning that. Since you moved from an academic role where you were doing research into a an industry role where you're still doing research and still using all of the tools that you were using in academia, do you feel like you had to showcase any transferable skills as you were making that move? I think that your story is such a perfect story of I was doing this in academia already. I just translated it over here, and which is
I know.
beautiful.
Yeah, I know. It's not something that most PhDs can say. Like, I mean, I have the benefit of having a PhD that is very marketable. I mean, a
Right.
PhD in computer science, I think, is not a detriment. In fact, every position I was applying to required a PhD in the computational sciences, and so I think it would be different if it's a PhD in the humanities or something like that, because that might not be as transferable to the industry. I don't have experience with that, so I don't know for sure. But I can just say that the what I worked on in graduate school, especially with machine learning, good Lord, that's part of everything now nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So those transferable skills just transferred, and I think I want to highlight that because um, when sometimes, like you were just mentioning, sometimes in some positions and for some people, like when I was moving into medical communications, I hadn't really done that kind of job within academia, right?
Hmm.
But I had to showcase that, okay, I can write, I can talk about science, I can make a PowerPoint, right? We can definitely make PowerPoints, and I can communicate the science. And so convincing, sometimes I think that's the challenging part of it is like showing them how what you did in academia is relevant to business.
Right.
And then sometimes you can have a situation like yours, which I think is the perfect situation where you're already using all these skills in academia. You're just transferring it to a different environment,
Hmm.
um, maybe with a different structure, like you were saying, with having more stakeholders interested in what you're doing. But it's the same type of work, and I find this also true in your case. Would you consider would you consider your role R&D?
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely say that. I mean, at least part of what I do is R&D, but I'd say primarily we are the teams that I've worked on are more about finding new targets or finding new therapies to go after. So yeah, it's definitely a research and development
Development. Yeah.
aspect.
So I find that whenever academics move into research and development roles, that's R&D, then it's easier because
Yeah,
yeah, it's much easier than changing.
absolutely.
Like you're doing lab research and all of a sudden you want to be a salesperson. What's like
Yeah.
tell me show me that you can sell, right?
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't. Well, I personally do not want to be a salesperson, and I
Yeah.
like the research and development. I'd say it's less open-ended than it would be in academia because you have to, like, I mean, you need to, I know that it's often said to fail fast. So like, if we know that something's not going to go in a good direction, we want to know that right away. So we're not wasting our time. And that's something that I don't know if you would have as much of in academia because like, if it fails, well, why did it fail? Let's investigate this further. But in the industry, it's kind of it fails. Okay, move on to the next thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Wow, this is amazing. Are you still involved in academia in any way?
No, I am not. I'd like to be, and I think it's something that I need to look into more. I did. There is well, so the programming language I utilize the most is a language called R, and there is a R user group at the University of Virginia where I still live in Charlottesville, and I've I have been active with a few meetings in the past, but that's something I have not done in a long time. Um, I originally, one of the ideas with academia was I wanted to, get into a teaching role, but I just really haven't found a good outlet for
Yeah.
that.
Well, I just wanted to ask that. No,
Mhm.
we're coming to the end of our conversation, and as we come to the end, I have this one final question for for you. So, if somebody, right now, a graduate student wants to move into something like you are doing, what would be one, two, or three pieces of advice you would give them to make that transition?
Wow, okay. Well, I guess it would mostly depend on where they're coming from. I mean, are we talking about someone with like a similar background to mine?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would tell them to stay up, find out what is the latest and greatest in in the biotech world. I mean, it's like what is the thing that most people are excited about, and focus on learning about that and learning what led to it. Also, what are the steps that we're undergoing to take that? What is the main thing to focus on right now? Um, I would also look into. I saw this great piece of advice recently that I wish I'd heard earlier on in life, is to find a paper of some kind of published research that involves something similar to yourself, similar skills to what you have, and recreate the first figure of the paper. What are the first analyses of it? So you can just showcase that you could do this type of analysis too if given the right data. And I think that would just be a great thing to at least be able to showcase that you can do these skills as well, because you might not have all the same relevant skills or background knowledge as a lot of people that are in biotech currently, but then you can showcase that you can be adaptable, especially if it's not something that you've done in the past. I feel like that would be extremely useful to put into your portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the case for having a portfolio, right? I think that that's
Yes,
really good advice because it gives you something to showcase, right? And sometimes people ask me, so how do I make a portfolio? Well, Mark just said it, like go find a paper, right? And the same for like for people like me who are trying to get into medical writing or communications. I'm like, okay, well, show me you can write, right?
yeah,
You have to show something, and apart from your resume, I feel a portfolio can really make a good case for this is what I can do,
right,
and even more so than your resume, because on your resume you're saying you can do it, your portfolio says I did it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and
And
so
that
that
you can communicate about it. I think that's also really important too. I think and if it needs to, you can showcase your projects that you've done, especially if they're relevant to the biotech field. And then, you can also start up a blog. I mean, you can even use LinkedIn as your blog per se, and be able
yeah.
to showcase that, if even if it's just a small topic, just be able to showcase that you can talk about this stuff in a meaningful way, and that you understand it. Like I think that's probably one of the biggest advantages that you can have going into biotech, because like I said, there's many stakeholders. I have to explain all types of machine learning concepts or different types of analyses to people that have never even taken a programming class, and so I often need to find ways to make this digestible. The key, in my opinion, is to have some kind of visualization. Like that's always the best way. I'm never going to be able to write code on a PowerPoint slide and just have people understand it. So
Yeah.
let's visualize it and hopefully get them there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so, so much. This was such a great conversation. I hear the doggy, but
Oh,
thank you so much.
terribly sorry.
No, it's no problem. But this is, I'm sure, we'll edit it out. But thank you so much for this
Yeah.
conversation.
Oh, thank you. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.